Well, Brian, it's great to have you. I'm really excited about talking about your path. And Icebreaker, as you know, is about the belief that the life that you're dreaming of is going to be built through the connections that you make. And your story is definitely an example of that. Not just in the fact that you've made a great life for yourself and you are an entrepreneur and you've taken a lot of risks, but it's just neat how the risks have put you in contact with some of these, great connections. So
No, this is great. And I think what you're doing with Icebreaker and these podcasts are wonderful. So thank you for wanting me to be a part of it and tell you, my little piece of my entrepreneurial experience.
yeah, awesome. Maybe we could start where you were doing a bunch of things that weren't necessarily entrepreneurial. How did you get into entrepreneurship? I mean, maybe I'll throw out that, you were a firefighter and then that kind of led to some additional risk taking, but you know,
So, so most people think I started in public service and public safety and then went on to being an entrepreneur. But actually that's not true. So I've always been an entrepreneur ever since I was a little kid. And I'll tell you sort of some of the funny stories associated with that. But my first company that I started, I think I was about 12, and the name of the company was called Safeco, Safeco. And it happened to be a security company. Again, when I was 12 years old, and I was reselling pepper spray, personal defense spray. I would go up to the grocery store and, buy it for $10 and sell it for $12. And then, I found a couple companies where they had these, these personal alarms that people could carry, and started doing the same with that. The part that's the kicker, around the same age, I came up with my first invention, and it was called the Handy Scan. And I actually have all the engineering drawings and everything still in the my files, next to me. And so again, I'm 12. My parents didn't have a lot of money, but we went as far enough to get a lawyer involved and go through a patent search. And what I invented was basically self-checkout at the grocery store. Problem was I didn't have the money to actually go forward with the full patent. So it was a great idea. Somebody else benefited from it, but that's kind of where it started, and that was before I ever got involved in public safety. My father was an entrepreneur. We lived outside of Boston in Massachusetts, and he had a business that unfortunately, due to a series of circumstances, went bankrupt, and our home and house was attached to it as collateral. So literally over the course of the night, we were homeless and without a house, and my whole world got turned upside down. But that, as a young kid, really shaped me and shaped my thinking. And one of the jobs my dad first got when we moved to the DC area was actually working for a police supply store. And so he would come home, and I'm 6 years old, and, hey son, I brought you a pair of handcuffs today. Hey son, I brought you this police patch. And so I think there was this emotional tie to law enforcement. I mean, every kid wants to be a firefighter or a police officer,
sure,
but that really started to hit home and grow the ambition for that as a young child.
So let's talk about how you got into the Secret Service.
Sure. So I remember I was on an airplane sitting next to a friend of my sister's and talking to him. And it happened to be that he actually worked for the Secret Service. And so I was telling him about, what I had done as an EMT and with the fire department, my pursuits of local law enforcement with both the county and the state. And he said, well, hey, have you thought about the Secret Service? And I actually forgot that I had applied, several years prior, but I told him no. And he said, well, let me tell you about this new team and division that they have. And it was this whole group of firefighters and paramedics and people with really that fire department skill. And he said, yep, you go and you get trained as a Secret Service officer or agent. And you get to do all the things that you did when you were a firefighter. And so that was really the driver. We landed back in Washington off that flight. I think I went home that night, downloaded the application, and it all started there.
So you applied, you got in, and then you're running around the world guarding President Obama.
So I actually started with President Bush. There's like any job, there's a progression, right? You don't just start out day one and doing, advances for the president. You start out on the bottom and you work your way up. And that's exactly what I did. Within a couple of years, I had the opportunity to transfer over to a specialty division within the Secret Service called the Technical Security Division. Again, primarily because of that background in fire rescue. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was probably one of the best decisions and stepping stones that I've had in my career. That individual group that most people have never heard of is really the technological jewel of the Secret Service and the government. I got cross-trained in anything from electronics to explosives to weapons of mass destruction, and went to military schools and really was exposed to this whole world of technology and countermeasures. And at the time, which will come into play later, in my story, I really started to see how the whole cyber world was becoming really important. Keep in mind, this is, early 2000s, but seeing how everything ultimately touched the internet or would touch the internet one way or another, which really drove a passion for me to start pursuing cybersecurity, which I ultimately went and got my master's degree in. So
it struck me, you did a lot of schooling, and you learned a lot, on the craft side. Was there a lot of connections that you're making in industry and in kind of on a global aspect as well, you were able to capitalize on later?
yeah, absolutely. So I realized, I think through some of the experiences and people that I've met in the Secret Service, that the world is actually a small place, and literally there's nobody that's unattainable. I had some amazing experiences. One that comes to mind via a contact with the Secret Service. I was able to get really engulfed into the Nashville music industry. Major, headliners down in Nashville that we started getting to meet, and they started asking for advice on different security related topics, and then I got to know people on an individual level. Great example of one of the band members, a friend of mine, Travis from Rascal Flatts. I was on a Secret Service trip in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He happened to be doing a concert with Rascal Flatts in Pittsburgh, called me up and said, hey, why don't you come and chill on the tour bus? I'd love to see you. And so I said, sure. I had the day off, and I'm sitting on the tour bus and we're just talking. And he says, hey, me and my wife are going to Vegas in a couple of weeks. And the person we were going with bailed out last minute. Do you and your wife want to go? And, said, I'd love to. Have no idea what my wife will say, but let me give her a call. Of which she said, go to Vegas with somebody from Rascal Flatts, great. And a few weeks later, we're on a plane and just strengthening that relationship that
Awesome.
had led into other networks, within the space. I probably have a dozen other examples like that.
You probably do. How much of the time that you spent, in the same room with a couple of presidents and dignitaries from around the world and so on, if you want to, touch on some of those moments where you just kind of took inventory of where you were and what you were doing and kind of reset your understanding of people being people, and, how much you think that might have influenced you?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, and to be fair to the role, in those roles, I don't want to mislead. We weren't sitting down and having a conversation with the president, or a foreign leader. With that being said, we were still able to be in situations that nobody else in the world could claim. And one of the greatest examples. Well, I have two. I'll give you one from both President Bush and one from President Obama. But starting with President Obama, the day he announced the withdrawal of and really the end of the war in Iraq, I had the opportunity to be with him in the Oval Office most of that day as he was prepping. So this unique role that we had within technical security, we had all these video cameras and high-tech equipment that were in the Oval Office for the address later that evening. So my job was to monitor the equipment and make sure there wasn't anything out of the norm. But I was able to observe as the only Secret Service person in the Oval Office during that time, the president wrestle through different points and things that he wanted to stress, and his view on the war and his view on the exit. And it just gave me a perspective to be able to absorb that in, and kind of later that night when I was home, watching the address, realizing where I stood that day and what I saw and what I observed. An example from President Bush, I remember Hurricane Katrina or Rita, and the Oval Office was getting a makeover. I think they were fixing the floors or something like that, and they had removed everything out of the Oval Office. And so the president was at the time a few different spots. We were with him in Colorado, then he went to his ranch, and then we were in Louisiana with him. But all he wanted to do was go back to the White House and address the nation from the Oval Office. But he couldn't, because it was like literally taken apart and in pieces, because we had not planned for the national disaster to happen, and that was scheduled in. And so the press really beat him up for that, right? And I observed him firsthand, literally at times, distressed that he couldn't go and in that public way, the symbolic way, be there for the American people, and so that was a lesson, I think, for me, in how what may seem to be reality isn't always reality, in learning that lesson about, the press and the media and how things can be spun in different ways.
For sure. Those are amazing opportunities. So I can't remember if it was a story that you had told me or one of our mutual friends who's in the Secret Service about getting like a gold-plated machine gun from UAE dignitary or something like that.
That was not me.
Okay.
I can imagine that to be very true, but
it was a gift for the president from some UAE, or one of those Arabic dignitaries when they visited. It had to be received, and
so that was another thing that our group did, and the mutual friend that you're referring to. Anytime a gift would come into the White House through the State Department via an official channel, we always had to be the ones to inspect it before it ever got to the president. So we've seen some pretty interesting things, come through the doors over the years.
That's so funny. I'd love to ask more about that. It's probably not as germane to Icebreaker as I'd like. So, all right. Yeah. So sometimes you were working with, in your role and in other places. Could you talk about how any of those connections have been valuable to you today?
Yeah. So a lot of them created credibility and connection to different just to different cultures and to different people, which would become important later on in my career when I started really focusing on international business. On the kind of the who did I interact with from an international perspective, and what did that look like? Two specific things just kind of come to mind, the stories that I'll always remember. First was every September, the United Nations General Assembly is in New York City, and the Secret Service gets tasked to protecting the world leaders and different dignitaries coming in for that event. And one year, I got the short straw, and I was assigned to the president of Iran, and it was Ahmadinejad. And if you remember any of the controversy over him, this was when President Bush was still in office. And I just have this memory of being at the United Nations, and there's this little circle waiting for him to come out, and listening to his speech where he literally was calling the president, I think, the devil or Satan, if I recall. And I'm responsible for driving his security detail. So I have my vehicle that I'm driving, and there's 5, Iranian Secret Service guys, all with guns in my car. And I'm, driving 1 or 2 cars, behind the president's limo. And so we go from the UN to Columbia University, where he gives another speech. And so the only thing I knew to do was to turn on the radio, and I made the guys in my car either listen to country music or Christian music. Just to soften the mood. So that was a fun one, and that's a historic one that I'll always remember.
That's a great one.
Another kind of, this is a whole connection piece, but one of my colleagues was doing an advance for the president in Rome, and she was in charge of the Vatican specifically, and the visit to the Vatican. A few weeks later, my wife and I were taking a Mediterranean cruise for her birthday, and one of the stops was the port outside of Rome. And so via my connection, my colleague in the Secret Service, she introduced me and connected me with the person from the embassy, who then connected us to the Vatican. And we were able to legitimately get a private tour of the Vatican, my wife and I, for hours. And the Pope's architect, this gentleman by the name of architect Luca, who had the equivalent role of Michelangelo, was the one who gave us the tour. And it was just this amazing, breathtaking experience. It was on a Wednesday. And if you've ever been to the Vatican, every Wednesday, the Pope gives a papal address out in St. Peter's Square. So the address was literally going on with thousands of people there, as my wife and I are walking through the hallways. And
sounds like a movie.
Yeah, and looking at things. And so, that was just an amazing experience. I connected really well with the Pope's architect. In fact, he invited me to go to his personal retreat in the Alps to go hunting on more than one occasion. When my daughter was born, we got a special gift that was sent to us from the Vatican, blessed by the Pope. Just things like that, where it all came from networking, right? It came from a relationship that one of my coworkers made during a work trip. And she introduced me to somebody, and, we were able to, I never knew that would have unfolded the way it did. But by being real and being able to just be a person with them, there was that mutual, attraction of friendship that grew.
Do you have a mindset that you kind of lock into when you're networking with people that, have global recognition?
A couple of things comes to mind. And to your first point, it is somewhat natural now. With the current business that I own, we have a division in South Africa, and literally on Saturday, I was on standby for a Zoom with the vice president. and of their country, and I've, so a scenario like that where I've talked to many ministers there, my phone will literally ring, and I'll be asked to jump on a Zoom. And what I found is the attraction is, yeah, we have a great story. Yes, we have a great product, but they just want to talk to me. They want me to be me. Ultimately, if you're trying to just be true to who you are, I think that comes across to people. I want to be viewed as a guy who you're able to create a connection with, in a relationship with. And if there happens to be something that I have that you can benefit from, you're now hearing about that or accepting that, due to what you've built with me versus, some strategic pitch that I've thrown you. What I'd like to say is just be you and don't care about what people think. But, I'd lie if I would say it's that easy. I have many experiences over the years of people who, didn't like what I thought, or didn't like what I was saying, or didn't like me for, legitimate or unlegitimate reasons. And I think just being human, those hurt. And, I have a hard time and wrestle over those, especially in business, being accused of something that may not have been my intention, or being misread by somebody. And that those are hard things for me. Right. But I've learned that, if my heart was in the right place, and, if I was trying to do good with what I was doing, then, it is what it is. Right. Easier said than done, even for me.
Yeah. I think that's good advice, being yourself when yourself is a good person to be. I think if you're a knucklehead and you're trying to convince somebody you're not, that's challenging. So probably a good foundation is the beginning. I'd love to hear how risk taking, specifically in the area of stretching your skills or stretching the limits of what you've already done, moved you forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think they all do build on each other. So for me, going back to when I was in government, I had this government job. I knew how I would get promoted based on time, wasn't going to get fired. I knew I was going to get a paycheck. I knew I had retirement. It was a very low risk environment from a financial perspective. Well, fast forward to, or rewind to 2013, I believe, we had sequestration that occurred within the federal government. And so for the first time ever, I'm getting a letter saying that I may get my salary reduced by 25%. And, and as a young guy and married, 25% hit at that stage was huge. So I suddenly realized that my government job wasn't as secure as I thought it was. So the scariness of moving into the private sector to where, you can just get fired because somebody's having a bad day, became less of a risk to me, because the risk balanced out, knowing that I could now lose salary just the same in the current role that I was in. So that was a pivotal point right there, a pivotal point for me to mentally be able to say, okay, I'm ready to pursue this, and I'm ready to take a jump for the right thing. I had been, networking with the business owner of another company for the last year, serving as a mentor for me. And so eventually, via that networking opportunity, I get a phone call one day and says, hey, Brian, I just sold out of one company and I'm now working at another. And I'm really looking for somebody who understands business the way you do, but also has that same technical background that I had built on within the Secret Service over the decade prior. And so from a Friday to a Monday, I took that leap. My salary doubled. I remember they flew me out on a private jet out to California, for that final interview. And I'm just sitting here saying, wow, this is what the other side was, not realizing that most people in business, don't get to fly on the private jet. It just happened to be that the CEO of the company owned a couple, so, but that was really what I jumped into. Right. And so,
Was there a gulp at all?
so there wasn't. And the reason why there wasn't was because I had that pre-established relationship with the CEO that I was going to be working with. I think if I had just outright applied for a job and went through the steps, then yeah, that barrier and that feeling would have been there. But particularly with this opportunity, I had been meeting with that CEO for a year. I had been having breakfast with him for the whole purpose of, he is where I wanted to be in life one day. Multi-millionaire, successfully ran multiple companies. Like I said, multiple private jets. The guy had succeeded, and I was ironically introduced to him from somebody else, in this whole networking sphere. And I wanted to learn, right? And I wasn't looking to get anything out of it other than being able to hear the wisdom that he had, and have him tell me the things that he wishes that he maybe did different when he was at my stage or at my age. So through that process, he was able to get to know me. He knew what my strengths were. He knew what my weaknesses were. He also had a passion to mentor and learn and help teach. So when I walked into that role, I knew that I wasn't hiding anything, behind the curtain. I knew that I could be successful at what my tasks were. And if I didn't know how to complete a task, there was a way to learn how to complete it or to get help to do it. Unfortunately, they had a couple turnovers on leadership. And, after about 8 years, I realized that, it was time for me to move on again. I was pursuing a job in the space that I wanted to be in. I ended up getting called by a recruiter regarding a particular opportunity to be president of a company. And they had a board in place and a CEO in place, and, gave me an offer. And, the offer was another, doubling of salary, so this whole theme of doubling and doubling and doubling, it kept on happening. So it was great. I talked to my wife and said, all right, this is what I want to do. I want to do it. And I remember I'm actually sitting in New Jersey at a friend's beach house, and we're having our first board meeting. And my now business partner was in Australia speaking at a conference. And what we had been told when we were recruited into the company was that they had established intellectual property, that they had a commitment of funds of multiple millions of dollars. So we had a long runway, and they were looking for us to come in and really build out a team and set the strategy and move the ball rolling. Well, sitting in that first board meeting, we realized that we'd been lied to. They didn't have any intellectual property. They wanted my business partner to bring all the smarts to it, and they didn't have any money. They wanted us to bring, all of our investor connections into the equation and raise the money for them. So I'm texting back and forth with the CEO of the company, again, now my business partner. And, basically we're like, well, what's the benefit of these other players being involved? They're asking for a salary, they're getting the vast majority of percentage in the company, and we need to bring the IP, we need to bring the funds, and we need to run the company. And so literally over text, we made the decision. We said, all right, let's both resign from this and let's go start our own thing. And as scary as that sounded, the peace and comfort behind it it just felt right. And from one perspective, I had quit my job and realized that I was lied to. And so, what choice did I have, from a risk perspective, other than, succeed? And, I have to provide for the family. I'm building a new house. All these things are happening. So, financial strength is of utmost importance. But yeah, I mean, that was a calculated risk that happened quickly. But it was probably one of the best business decisions I ever made.
and then you kind of rolled out of that boardroom, made that decision, and then started.
Started our own company, and the name of our company is Protected by AI. The basis of what we did is we said, with the company, we want to protect people, property, places, and profits. Corporate profits or government-based profits. So that was really the ethos or the mission that we had. And we wanted to do it at the time, initially focused really in three spaces. So we were looking at cybersecurity, we were looking at intelligence. So, the whole either offering business intelligence, to a commercial organization, or intelligence to a government entity. And then the third piece just had primarily to do with big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, kind of the AI umbrella, if you will, in bringing that to clients.
Clearly, AI is a key technology right now that's on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
And right now we're also dependent heavily on digital. It's in the conversations about protecting the integrity of elections, for example. What does Protected by AI do for something like that?
You can't go to Google News, or turn on the TV without hearing something about a hack or something in that that digital space that's occurring. And if you think back to December, the country experienced and was exposed to one of the largest hacks that had ever happened. State actor hacks. And it was called SolarWinds. So, you look that up, I'm sure you've heard of it and your listeners have. But SolarWinds was one of the biggest attacks that had occurred in the United States. And so we started thinking, and JT started thinking about, how can we take some of our experience and solve that problem, knowing that we're going into this meeting tomorrow and that's all they're going to want to talk about. And so literally, he calls me up and he says, Brian, I was in my gym and figured it out. I figured out how to solve this malware problem, this, how to deal with viruses and Trojans, and all of these attacks that are occurring. And so he starts explaining what he's discovered, and I can say it. I can say it now. One, it's all in our new book that's coming out, and two, we rushed that next day immediately to get it patented. But the solution was something that we call CodeLock, and the concept is amazingly simple. How do you secure evidence? You go to a crime scene and, there was a shooting, you go and you look for the evidence, and you take the evidence and you put it in a container and you seal that container and you sign that container and you create a chain of custody for it. So, later on you're in front of the judge and the judge says, is this the bullet casing that you picked up? And you look at the log and you look at the signature and, yes, it was. We said, well, what if we could secure the code that same way? What if we could provide a locking mechanism, a series of hash algorithms that were based on that code, in a way to monitor it? So if there happened to be any change, if a virus got introduced or there was a Trojan horse, or some element of ransomware, you would immediately be alerted and know where in the code that problem was occurring.
Sounds like utilizing blockchain technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Good pickup on that. I know you love cryptocurrency, and so yeah, we have really the basis of cryptocurrency is blockchain, and what we do is we look at the different aspects of code and put them into blocks, and when we end up doing the hashing, and that goes into a blockchain structure as we're doing our monitoring.
Is it when is it available?
So we just came out with our first beta version. So come April 1st, it's available for purchase. We'll probably start doing, much more of a marketing push between April and May. But yeah, we're starting to set up meetings with clients that want to see the product demoed and look at it. So it's definitely exciting moving into that that phase, and seeing the reactions from people when they're looking at the solutions.
Super cool, Brian. Super cool. I'm excited about that. Well, so much more we can chat about. Maybe a question at the end. If there was something that you would do differently, something that you learned from, could you share that with us?
I think two things come into mind. I think, earlier in my career and into my last company, it would be to put more value in my capabilities and not necessarily let other people bring you down on their opinions. And, just this building of confidence to realize that, what, I do have something to provide and offer that is valuable, and in understanding and believing behind that value, because that gives you that confidence to take those next steps and additional steps. So that would be one thing. And then I think a little bit more practically, just from an entrepreneurial perspective and as a business owner, I've learned a lot over the last year when it comes to entering into legal agreements with other people. And I've had to learn the hard way through some legal disputes and battles that are very costly. And I think coming out of that, realizing that, if I had done some things differently from a contractual perspective, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in. But the eagerness to jump into the business opportunity at the time hindered me from making sure I had the right, T's and C's in place to move forward from a contractual perspective. And so that's definitely a lesson learned. Nobody likes to read through the contracts and look at the paperwork, but if you don't, it's going to come back and bite you in the butt.
That's good. Well, if you network well, you'll find, a great attorney that you trust and that you work well together, that you have a good relationship with, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And my attorney, who I actually met in the United Arab Emirates when I was doing work there on some contracts with the government, he's now become one of my best friends. Literally, I've been to his house in Dubai. I've met his mom and wife and kids, and he's been over in the States. And
that's fantastic. And what a great way to end, our conversation here on the Icebreaker Reel, is another connection that you made while you were in the Secret Service, right?
No, that was actually when I was at my previous company, Decision Sciences.
Okay.
We were working through a very large, multi-million-dollar contract with the government of the UAE, and I was having some trouble with the attorneys we were currently using, and two separate people had recommended this current person. His name's Cayenne, and the rest was history, as they say.
Got the deal closed.
Did. Yep. Got the deal closed.
Got an attorney for life.
Attorney for life, and have gone on to close multiple others with him since. So it's been great.
The life you're dreaming of is built through the connections you make.
Absolutely.
It's real. Brian, appreciate you. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Thanks, Dave. Anytime.